What's the worst I hate to break it to you moment you had with someone? I had a guy working for me that was extremely nice, easy to get along with, and wildly inept. Not even like low effort, but just not capable of learning seemingly basic tasks. We tried everything: coaching, giving him legitimate checklist instructions, having a team lead sit with him for a couple weeks to walk him through basics. Everything. Everyone said the same thing. He just couldn't do the job. Everything he did had to be double-checked by somebody else, which meant that we might as well have somebody else do it. But everyone liked the guy. They thought he was easygoing and cool to be around. Everything. But still, he just straight up couldn't do that job. So I had to find another place for him in the company that would better match his skills. The option would be for him to either take the lower job with lower pay, or he would be fired with severance. I was not looking forward to the conversation. I called him in for a wanted to break it to him, and the first thing he started with was, "Hey boss, before we start, I just want to tell you that I really feel like I've been doing a great job here, and I would like to talk about a raise." Yeah, that conversation was not a fun one. Not a commenter. I had a similar instance in my career where the person legitimately was working harder than anyone else to try and learn and contribute. Everyone saw her as the first to show up, the first to volunteer, attending conferences on weekends to improve skills, and basically working on improvement constantly. As the one reviewing her work and attempting to give her additional training constantly, it became a huge burden on me trying to get her to some level of competency and failing to even get her to complete basic tasks without coaching constantly. I had to break it to her that we couldn't keep her on the team. She cried a lot about how she was working harder than everyone else, and she didn't understand why this was happening. She got angry when I tried to give her some parting constructive criticism that she was asking for, and stormed off screaming that the group couldn't function without her, and that we were going to realize all she really did after she was gone. It was so hard thinking of how much easier it would be with her gone. She really was a hard worker, really was dedicated, really gave it more effort than anyone else. She just wasn't capable of doing the job. Story 2. I had to tell my friend that the online girlfriend he'd been talking to for months was actually a scammer using stolen photos. He was planning to send her money to come visit, and breaking the news to him was one of the toughest conversations I've ever had. Commenter: So, my friend had a similar thing going on, claimed to have talked a bunch on the phone, and we didn't really believe him. Eventually, she asked for money for a ticket, and we were all like, there it is, and he finally believed us. He decided to put it to a test, to prove it once and for all, and told her that he'd bought her a ticket for the flight, assuming she'd make up an excuse to get out of it. He didn't really buy the ticket, assuming he was just calling out the catfisher. Well, to his surprise, the day of, he got a call from her at the airport, panicking because they couldn't find the ticket. He managed to play it off as a mistake and was able to get her on the flight. She really was the big titty goth girl from the photos. They dated for 5 years, and she came out every summer for like 5 years before they grew apart. Story 3? Not me, but I went to visit my dad at his job, and he has an employee there who was kind of bragging to his other coworkers about how well he has been doing at the job and thinking of asking for promotion. My dad later told me that he fired that guy later that day due to poor performance despite multiple attempts to help him. Commenter: That happened with someone my husband worked with. Everyone stopped helping him because of his bragging. Once that happened, everything he touched was a complete disaster. Story 4. My best friend in high school was overweight and would sweat profusely. We would come in after lunch in Texas and he would smell awful. I think he would wear his clothes without washing them after sweating. We had English after, and the AC sucked, so teacher put a fan in the window. He would sit in front of the fan and blow his funk over everyone. The class got together and voted that I should be the one to tell him. Well, I had to break it to him that for the last year he has smelled horribly. I felt pretty bad, but he never stunk again. Haha, this is way more of a homie help out than a hate to break it to you. It's absolutely an awkward conversation, but I am sure he was happy someone said something. Story 5. Oof, definitely the time I had to tell a friend that the business opportunity he was so excited about was actually a pyramid scheme. He was asterisk, so asterisk hyped, talking about how he was going to quit his job and be his own boss. I tried to ease into it, but there's really no soft way to say, hey man, you're about to lose a lot of money and ruin your friendships. Commenter: I had a roommate who had lunch with an old college buddy one time who told him about this great business venture he could join and gave him a lot of the details of it, including some paperwork. His friend told him several times, it's not an MLM. Story 6. My sister-in-law. My niece plays field hockey and I love her. She plays in 2 different leagues, meaning it's 3 hours of field hockey games every Saturday and Sunday. My Sile expected me and my husband to drive an hour one way both days to watch niece play and pay rapt attention the whole time. Did I mention the games are at 7 a.m.? We did this about once a month on either Saturday or Sunday, and I guess this wasn't enough for her. We had to tell her that we loved niece, but we weren't going to be as involved as she was in the league. Added: sometimes people don't realize that other people have things to do. While it's great to hear that your niece is involved heavily in the league, and I wish all the best for her, but adults have lives too. We can't just put down what we are doing to commit to something like that. Once a month is good for sure, but not every weekend. If it was my own kid, I would try my ever-loving best to be there every game. But in this case, you are not obligated to do so. That's just my opinion. Sometimes people don't realize that other people have things to do. While it's great to hear that your niece is involved heavily in the league, and I wish all the best for her, but adults have lives too. We can't just put down what we are doing to commit to something like that. Once a month is good for sure, but not every weekend. If it was my own kid, I would try my ever-loving best to be there every game. But in this case, you are not obligated to do so. That's just my opinion. Story 7. I came back from my first day of finals in my first semester of college to find 2 women in suits and a campus police officer waiting for me. The women were mental health counselors from the university. One of them tried to talk to me but started crying. The other one couldn't say anything either. It was finally the cop who told me that someone had broken into my mother's house that morning and murdered her, my mom. Story 8. I had an upper management type guy try to explain to me, in a very condescending way, how a specific device works and how to install it. All completely wrong. I wrote the manual for it. I own the patent ... It's named after me. Commenter. The company I was at called in a consultant, Peter, to help with a bit of data migration. We're in a meeting and the guy is laying out a pretty easy to follow timeline that sounds like it'll take about a week. Longer than we'd thought, but totally doable. The boss didn't like that and started pestering Peter with what ifs. What if we didn't use a staging machine and dumped it all at once? What if we physically migrated the data via tape instead of using the network, etc.? After the 3rd or 4th. That won't work because Peter asked the boss if he knows who wrote the software in the first place. Boss, Pulsoft, why? Peter, and do you know why they were called Pulsoft? Boss, no, enlighten me, smart guy. Peter, because my initials are PAL and I started the company. The boss didn't have any more questions or suggestions. Came to find out later that we wrangled Peter because of a personal relationship he had with someone in the C-suite. Story 9. 15 years ago, my friend's father sadly passed away shortly after we graduated college. It was devastating for him. He figured he'd at least get a nice money boost to help him get back on his feet. But unfortunately, his father kept it a secret that he was deep in debt and had no liquid cash to his name. My friend had no support and fell into a terrible depression. He was broke. He couch crashed with me and our friends for a while. He quit his job, and he got comfortable with this new lifestyle. 2 years later, he's still spending a month here and there with various friends around the city, eating their food, occupying their couch, sipping off their booze cabinet, using the terrible, tragic passing of his father as his reasoning for being the way he was. It had been 2 years. We understood the pain he felt was real, but it was really time for him to actually get back on his feet and taking care of himself. We didn't know how to explain it to him, but we all felt he was taking advantage of us and was using his father's death as an excuse to just not get a job. I found him a job, a nice one he would be good at, he went to school for, and didn't need prior work experience. I talked to a team lead and an HR rep and got him a contact line for them, basically assuring an interview and a job offer if he arrived on time and sober. Weeks later, my HR rep and this team lead were confused, thinking I didn't relay the information to him. He never called. I gave him a layup of a job opportunity, and he just ignored it outright. I called him out on it, but he told me to calm down and chill out, and that I wasn't being sensitive to his depression, and I wasn't understanding of his needs. So my worst, I hate to break it to you moment, wasn't actually with him. It was with all my friends afterward. I had to tell them all to turn him down every time he asked to stay a week at their place. It sucked. The timing and my response to his refusal would give it away. This guy knew I was the horrible git who turned all his friends against him and denied him free room and board. Hell, I was probably going to be the sole reason he'd blame for his inevitable descent into homelessness. I accepted the burden and called them up, explaining I had a job lined up for him, and he refused, and we must all stop giving him a free place to stay if he won't take an easy job. Yes, it sucks. His dad died. And it sucks. He didn't get any kind of inheritance to start his life proper. It sucks. He felt this terrible depression that lingered for years. And most of all, it sucks. He had a group of enabling friends like me who humored it for so long it just became his accepted norm. We failed him. He didn't end up homeless, though. Without us offering his jobless butt a couch to crash on anymore, he ended up moving in with his aunt. Apparently, she didn't take his excuses, didn't put up with his laziness, and did all the things we should have been doing all along. No booze allowed, no weed, no gaming after she went to bed. She only had one TV in the house, and it was for Food Network only. He got a job developing 3 days assets for VR titles and started moving up and up, creating VR experiences for architecture companies. Dude still hates me probably, and I'll admit I made mistakes to justify it. But I'm really grateful his aunt was there. I did what I needed to do, but it would have been even 10 times worse if he did end up living on the streets, still blaming his father's sudden death for his 2-decade-long predicament. Story 10. When I got the call that my mom had passed, they wouldn't say that she had passed or that she had died. They kept saying medical things like, she doesn't have a pulse, she is not breathing, etc. It took a long time to understand that they were saying she was gone and that it was final. Story 11. Freshman year of college. A friend said that he was going to go barefoot as much as possible to toughen up his feet so that his future kids would be born with tough feet too. Had to explain to him why that wouldn't work and the basics of genetics. He didn't believe me and stuck with his theory. We have since lost touch, but I know he had a son a few years ago. I'll have to ask him if it worked out. Story 12. I had to tell this girl that my boyfriend she was crushing on was, well, my boyfriend. She kept talking about how cute he was, and I was like, I hate to break it to you, but he's taken by me. The awkward silence after that was priceless. Commenter, I had kind of the opposite situation. I was at a church event with my older brother, and this woman kept staring daggers at me. After a while, she came over and was like, so how do you two know each other? And I was like, well, I was born, and they were like, this is your little sister. Oh man. The look on her face when she realized she'd been ready to fight his sister. Story 13. It's part of my job, but telling a couple their son had died overnight and was not able to be resuscitated. Those screams are a sound you can never scrub out of your brain. Story 14. There was a rule at my job where only one of these two supervisors could be off at a time. One of them loved to take a full week off work during holidays to get more bang for his PTO buck. One year, he had Thanksgiving week off, but the other supervisor had family come to town that week on late notice. The other supervisor asked him to cancel just one of his days so she could spend the day with family. He declined, even after she basically begged him, and he even said he didn't have anything to do that day. She then proceeded to take PTO days every Wednesday of a holiday week for the next calendar year, effectively blocking him from taking his cheap weeks off. He told me that he thought it was funny because he knew she didn't have enough time to take all those vacation days off, and she'd eventually have to cancel some of them. I gotta tell him, I hate to break it to you, but she only took 2 hours off each of those days. See, the rule didn't differentiate between a partial or whole day, so she only had to burn 24 or so hours to block him. He looked devastated. It was kind of petty on both of their parts, but I give her credit for being creative in her retribution. Story 15. I have two. The first one was having to tell my father and my brother's girlfriend that my brother had been in a bad automobile accident, that my cousin who had been with him was dead, and my brother was in a coma in a hospital 3 hours away. The second one was when I had to tell my mother that my sister was sleeping with my mother's boyfriend. That was a tough one. And yes, I was 100% sure because they did it in front of me. Story 16? My sister and her husband had a newborn baby, 4 days old. My sister's husband turned to me and said, "He'll sleep soon, right?" Commenter? My sister was recently celebrating that their youngest is now sleeping through the night. Their daughter is 2. She hadn't had a full night's sleep in over 2 years. Trying to ask as many no, but how are you really going questions to everyone I know with young kids? So I know what TF I'll be getting myself into. Story 17. Had to tell my mom that my grandma, her mom, had died and been buried a month before. My mom had been in a pandemic-related coma for 6-ish weeks during that time. At one point, they were actually in the ICU, in beds beside each other. Neither ever knew. So, yeah, that sucked. Story 18. I used to work in a customer care call center for a major telecommunications company. A woman called in one day to inquire about two $99 charges on her bill from Lavalife. She kept pressing about the charges, what they were, and I had to explain to her that Lavalife is a dating service and that the charges were legitimate. If she didn't make them, did someone else live in her house who might have? There was only her husband, and I heard her go from, but he would never, to I have to go now, as it set in. That was almost 20 years ago now, and I still feel awful about it. Comter? I work at a bank, and recently one of my coworkers was helping a member trying to figure out what a charge was. It was for a salon, which neither her or her husband went to, coming from his card on a day when he was supposed to be on a business trip. Story 19. My ex-wife tried to dead twice in 1 week. The second time, she was committed to a psych ward. Her mother decided to come over and help with the kids and household chores. The second day she is at the house, she comes out of the bedroom disoriented. Turns out she's having a stroke. For the third time that week, I had to call 911. I had to go to the psych ward and tell my drugged-up wife that her mother, who she was very close to, was in the hospital because she had a stroke. Story 20. Had a friend ask me about some green sign in the distance. It was in fact a sodium vapor sign, giving off an intense orange light, which sodium vapor is known for. Had to tell him right there that he was colorblind. He was in his mid-30s too. A lot of odd things that had happened in his past fell into place for him that day. Story 21. Not me, but my ex a couple years ago got a job as a cook working at a big hospital. They had a mostly set and reoccurring cycle of dishes/items in Golden Corral-style stations around the cafeteria. Basic get food dressed up or pre-prepped. Nothing too fancy. His first month, he became familiar with some of the residents/doctors who would make small talk and shoot the crap with him as he loaded up their plates. One of these doctors was a man originally from India who was very enthusiastic about the country fried chicken smothered in pepper gravy. He said it was his favorite dish out of anything else there, and it wasn't uncommon for him to stop by at the end of his shift to purchase extra to take home. My partner's first time working the entree station, the doctor pointed and asked my partner for his usual country fried chicken. My partner stared at him confused. They didn't serve country fried chicken, but they have chicken fried steak. When he nonchalantly informed the doctor of this, the man's eyes went wide. He looked genuinely shocked. "This isn't chicken." My partner described the expression on his face as going from jarred and baffled to so sad when he realized he had been eating beef this entire time, but also that it had tasted so delicious. Apparently, despite eating other types of meat, the man was still deeply tied to his Hindu roots and avoided beef in his regular diet because of this. The previous cook before him had mistaken these ambiguous meat patties smothered in thick gravy for chicken, so wires got crossed, and he then relayed that incorrect information to the doctor. I still cringe when I think about this. X felt so sad he had to be the one to tell him. Story 22. I once had to tell a friend that the homemade cookies she proudly brought to a party were just repackaged store-bought ones we all recognized. The look on her face was priceless, but we still love her. Story 23. Having to tell a student who was almost totally blind that she likely couldn't be an ear nurse. She and her dad moved to our district, and at the IEP, her dad starts talking about how he can't wait for Sue to go to nursing school. I frantically scanned my brain, trying to think of how someone who was going to need Braille would be able to do that job. Then Sue piped up to say that her dream was to be an ear nurse. Her prior district told her she could do anything, including this. She had a degenerative disease that would eventually make her blind. I talked to my friends who are nurses. I talked to our career lady at the school. I researched, but there just wasn't any way someone who couldn't see could be an ear nurse. I reconvened the IEP and had to explain this. I know both were in denial, but I was not happy that the prior district pumped up this idea. I mean, sure, there is lots she could still do, but that just wasn't one of them. Then another student came from the same district with the idea she could be a CSI investigator. She was also nearly blind. Commenter: "Oh man, what the people at that district did was so unkind to these kids. Toxic optimism, and setting them up for huge disappointments. Also, WTH, why would you even begin to promise that everything would be possible? There are some things where sight is a necessity and not negotiable." Did they promise the kids they could get a driver's license too? Because that wouldn't surprise me one bit. Story 24. I was crossing the road at Great Portland Street when I heard a screeching of brakes. I turned around to see a dude flying through the air. It all happened in slow motion. I got to him quickly and checked him over. He said, "I'm going skiing tomorrow." I said, "No, you're not," as I found the bottom half of his leg was snapped. Had to phone his wife and break the news. Story 25. I was a 15-year-old freshman and she was 17-year-old senior. When we started dating, she said she wanted to wait 2 months before having sex. I was a virgin and wasn't even really worried about it, so I agreed. Then a month later, things got hot and heavy and she insisted that we do it. I asked, "Are you sure? You said you wanted to wait," but she insisted on banging it out anyways. Afterwards, she said that it was a test to see if I would actually wait like I said I would and that I failed just like every other guy before me did. Then she dumped me. Story 26. I once had to tell a friend that the crypto expert he hired was actually part of a pyramid scheme. He stared at me in silence for a few seconds before saying, "I already invested everything." Story 27. My dad has been a musician since the 70s. He's incredibly talented, can play multiple instruments, and has written many songs that honestly would sound at home on the radio. About a year or so ago, some scam artist told him they loved his work and wanted to represent him and get his music out there to make money. They just needed a small, upfront fee. My poor dad was so happy too. He had wanted this for literal decades. I think that's what clouded his judgment at the time. And yeah, the moment he told me, loud alarms went off in my head. I researched these people online and found an ocean of comments saying they all got scammed. I wanted my dad to be happy, but I couldn't let him be scammed, so I told him. He accepted it, kind of brushed it off, but it was that, "Yeah, I should have known this would happen," kind of response. Really depressing to see him so happy, just to be let down. I know to you and me, this would have been an obvious scam, but my dad is from a different time and has no idea about computers or online culture. Duck scammers. Story 28. I hate to break it to you, but the hardest moment was telling my best friend that their partner was cheating. They were so in love and completely blinded by it. And when I broke the news, it shattered their world. It even strained our friendship for a while because sometimes, even when you're trying to help, the truth is too painful to accept. Another one, I had to tell a friend that not only had his fiancée been cheating the whole time, but she was way into substances, which he did not condone. I had met her at a bar months prior, and she'd given me a BJ a couple times, and we'd do BJ whenever I saw her out on the town. Then he invited over for dinner to meet his girlfriend. I assumed it was a new relationship, and figured no harm, no foul, and decided not to mention any of my past dalliances with her, just that I knew her from the industry. I bartend, and she was a food purveyor. They invited me over for dinner a couple more times, and he would usually fall asleep early, and she and I would go out a couple rounds. One time, she tried to give me a BJ, but I chalked it up as drunkenness, and it didn't happen again. It wasn't until the dinner where he announced his proposal that I got the full timeline. He mentioned that they had been dating a whole year before he had decided to propose, even though he knew she was the one after 4 months. That made me do the math. She'd been doing me good, and I other guys that I had heard of, for a full 3 months during their relationship. The next morning, I had to break it to him. When he broke it off, she admitted she had a BF in NYC that she stayed with for her 3-day, every other week bonus trips. Story 29. My uncle called me to ask where my mom was. I told him she went to look at my grandfather's body. Apparently, he didn't know his father had passed yet. That was pretty awkward. Story 30. I found out my friend's girlfriend had Hep C. Her cousin told me she had it and she was not going to tell him. No one else would tell him, so I called and told him. It was Valentine's Day. Awkward. Story 31. Back around 2007, I had an older colleague who was excitedly flitting around the office telling everyone about some lottery she had won, and that she was going to quit just as soon as the 100,000 cleared in her account. Mary was only in her 50s, so still years away from retirement. On top of that, she was an administrative assistant at a nonprofit, so we're not talking about a lucrative career where she was squirreling away funds for a rainy day. And here she was, ready to resign a decade early over a sum that would only be worth a few years of salary after taxes. Did I mention that there was talk of a fur coat? I would have normally kept my mouth shut. After all, her poor financial planning was none of my business, and frankly, I would not have missed her in the office. I was not a fan. I just couldn't be silent once she got to my office, though. It was obviously a scam. I'm not trying to rain on your parade, but are you absolutely sure this is legit? Oh yeah, I already gave them my banking information and everything. They're depositing the money today. You may want to call your bank just to be sure. No, it's fine. Okay, congrats. Per S, dear reader, not even an hour later, I hear her screeching into her phone that, "No, don't close my account. They're supposed to be depositing the money. Depositing. No, depositing. No, they're not taking it out. They're putting it in." My office mate and I just looked at each other like Mary didn't say anything to anyone about the fraud. Epilogue. About a year later, a bunch of us, Mary and myself included, were laid off at the beginning of the recession. I didn't like Mary, but I didn't wish her unwell. I can only imagine how much harder it was for her to find work than us 20 and 30-somethings who lost our jobs. The people laid off were cherry-picked based on who the founder didn't like. Question a process? Crap list. Do anything other than cheerlead the founder's ideas? Crap list. Run around the office talking about quitting? Mary absolutely landed on the crap list that day. She had been one of the first employees the org ever hired, and just like that, she was disposable. Story 32. A friend of mine unironically thought that he was the first person ever to experience existentialism. He literally said that no one ever talks about how small we are in the grand scope of the universe, and kept saying that no one else ever wants to talk about the meaning of life. I felt too bad to explain to him that the concept of how small we are in relation to our world has literally been one of the backbones of philosophy for centuries. Story 33. My primary care doctor who told me I have anxiety and exaggerate my health symptoms. When I got to tell her, I saw an endocrinologist on my own. Luckily, with my insurance, I didn't require a referral and was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder. Story 34. 3 friends and I applied to the same university. I remember that the day the results came out, one of my friends was traveling and had no internet access, but we still communicated by pager. It was hard to tell my friend on his trip that he did not get into the university. Story 35. Sister's a victim of her own impulsivity. She really likes new cars and will roll negative equity into a new car. Then she'll get bored of it, stop maintaining it, trade it in for a loss, and have an even bigger loan. And this was back when loans were pretty much free and they could finance anybody. So she called me up all excited because she found a new truck, got approved for financing, and was on the way to go buy it. So I went to meet her there, big V8 full-size pickup truck, for a woman working part-time and living in a congested city. Why do you want this? My kids need a place to transport their bikes, and I want to go camping, so I test drove it with her. Salesman was doing everything in his power to make the sale, and fair enough, he's not a financial advisor. He doesn't need to deal with the fallout. But right there in the showroom, I had to tell her that, look, this is an awful idea. You can't afford this. It's going to be a huge burden on you, and you need to walk away. Thankfully, she did. Salesman would have punched me if he could have gotten away with it. He was seething mad. Story 36. The morning after my grandmother died in the night, the nursing home couldn't reach my dad, so they called to give me the news instead. I had to call and tell him his mother had died when he had been planning to go see her that day. I was naked on the call because I had just had sex for the second time with my first long-term girlfriend. I guess this was a weird story. Story 37. Had a friend who was deployed. His girlfriend got into substances and have sex the dealer. I was over the dealer's house and saw a video where he has intim with her. Went home, called my friend and described the situation as if it happened to someone else asking if I should inform the person. He unequivocally told me I should, so I told him the story was about him. He thanked me and said he'd deal with it. They are currently married, actually going pretty strong. Story 38. I lived with the roommates, and we got a new sublet of some guy they all knew. The guy's girlfriend of 5 years wanted to take a break. Everybody in the house said she had clearly wanted it dump him for a while. The guy moved in, and I become friends with him. He definitely thought they were getting back together, but he got depressed and drank a lot. One night he tells the housemates and I that he cheated on her a few times and even slept with his ex-GF on and off the first year they dated. Yikes. She, his new ex, was an absolute bombshell. Could have easily been a model. The kind of face you could just stare at. Unreal looking, but she was a total little Miss Princess. Real self-centered type, but a lot of fun to party with. She still hung around with the overall group of friends and my roommates. One night, everybody was drinking together when her ex wasn't around. Somebody brought up cheating and she started laughing. Someone was curious why she found it funny. Her, it's just not something I have to worry about. I'm too attractive, nobody would cheat on me. Story 39. My current project manager, we'd been selecting a new software for almost a year, and was in the meantime assorted to a more boring project. After a year, we'd finally kicked off, and about a week in, she took me into a meeting room apart. There's been a merge. The project is called off. Story 40. One of the hardest I hate to break it to you moments was telling my coworker that the promotion they were so sure of went to someone else. They had been working so hard and talking about it constantly. Breaking that news felt like crushing their spirit, and I could see the disappointment hit them hard. Story 41. TL. Had to gently crush someone's dreams of dating my fiancé when I overheard her planning to ask him out after work. Story. My fiancé and I work together, just in different parts of the company and building per-hour requirements, though our respective teams cross paths frequently. Nobody but Har and 2 other people knows we're actually together, though, because we keep our personal and professional lives very separate. We don't even interact at work beyond carpooling there and back. This one lady on my team apparently developed a little crush on him, and he's clueless about when women are flirting with him. He's neurodivergent, so for a long time, he just thought she was being friendly. I didn't even catch on to it at first because I really don't pay much attention to what my coworkers do beyond work-related things, but I guess she kept finding reasons to go hang out around him when our team's work was done and chatting him up. He eventually caught on and expressed his concern that she was coming on to him to me in private and was unsure of what to do. So I said I'd handle it. It wasn't long before I heard her giggling to a group of other coworkers and saying stuff like, "Yeah, I think he's totally down. I'm gonna go for it and ask him out after work." So I drifted over nonchalantly and was like, "Ooh, an office romance. Who's the guy?" And of course she told me it was my man. So I had to gently crush her dreams and say, Oh, I'm so sorry, girl, but he's engaged to me." Felt kind of bad because she looked so mortified and crestfallen at the same time. Story 42. I was traveling for work in Australia. Let's say I was commuting between Perth and Sydney and back again. The back again flight was at stupid o'clock, requiring me to get up at 3 a.m. to leave at 4 a.m. to be at the airport by 5 a.m. I was groggy and moving on autopilot. I stopped to buy a coffee at an airport kiosk, and the barista asked me, "Where are you flying to today?" I sleepily replied, "To Sydney," and the guy looked stunned. He said, "I hate to break it to you, but you are in Sydney." Story 43. I had an employee who was a strict vegetarian for religious reasons. One day we were discussing the employee salad bar, and he mentioned how much he loved the Caesar dressing packets they offered. I was surprised and stupidly blurted out, "Oh, I didn't realize you ate fish." He responded that he was vegetarian and gave me a quizzical look. I had to explain that the salad dressing contained both fish and Parmesan cheese, which is almost always cultured with animal rennet. He didn't believe me, and the next day insisted on reading the ingredients on one of the packets to me to prove to me that I was wrong. Then he got to the anchovies and got quiet. I still feel awful that he had to find out that way. Neither of us handled the situation well. Story 44. Telling my college composition class that the plural of Jones is Joneses. As in, look, there go the Johnsons and the Joneses walking down the street. In English, you add s or es to make plurals of regular nouns. House, houses, chair, chairs, class, classes, etc. Asterisk, but proper nouns, names don't have a special rule. They're like all other nouns. So, one Smith, several Smiths, one Garcia, several Garcias, one Miller, several Millers, one Jones, several Joneses, one Davis, several Davises. Some of my students just about lost their minds, which was fairly hilarious to watch. They still wanted to use apostrophes, which turns the nouns into possessive adjectives, because you don't make plurals by using apostrophes. Note that apostrophes is plural, with no apostrophe. Story 45. This was by accident, but one of the most uncomfortable moments I've ever experienced. I was dating a guy whose best friend, I'm going to call him Joe Blow, was engaged to a woman named Linda. One night, the guy I was dating was coming over to watch a movie and cook dinner and asked me if he could bring along Joe Blow, whose fiancé was out of town. His actual real name was more of an unusual name, not a really common name, both first and last names. The evening went along fine, until I learned the last name of the girl he was engaged to. And I knew her from years before when she married to a guy named Asterisk Joe Blow Asterisk. Yep, Same name. As they were leaving, I said to him, "It's so funny she's marrying you now, when her ex-husband's name is also Joe Blow." "It's funny, ha ha ha." I mean, it was shocking to me. He looked surprised, and I asked, "Oh, you didn't know that." I was a little embarrassed. He said, "I didn't even know she had been married before." The guy had a PhD in psychology to boot. He looked to his friend as if he wanted some verification, and his friend said, yeah, man, she was married to Joe Blow for about 5 years. They've been divorced about a year. It was a terribly awkward moment for all three of us, and I really wish I hadn't said anything, but, Story 46. My Mills swears she made a deal with the devil to have a son, my husband. I asked how, and she said she bartered his soul, so I need to take him to church and save him. I informed her his should didn't belong to her, and you can't barter a soul that doesn't belong to you. You can only barter your own soul, so the soul she sold was her own. I mean, the whole thing is batcrap crazy, but she had a full meltdown about it. Story 47. My friend has been constantly complaining about her husband. I visited them for a couple of weeks, and I had to break to her that she is the problem, like massively so. I genuinely felt sorry for her husband by the time I left. The man gets both verbally and emotionally abused constantly. I told him he should report her to the police if she ever hit him again, because honestly, the situation is completely out of control. Even more out of control than she is. She needs a couple nights in jail to rethink her choices, TBH. Story 48. I'd been working on a project for about 10 months. It was finally done. I got to present it to my department's leadership. They loved it. I did a great job. They wanted to flow it up. I ended up presenting to the president of the company. A highlight in my early career, for sure. I went and did the presentation. All 5 people in the chain of command between me and the president were there, along with a lot of the other senior leadership in the company. The president seemed pleased with the presentation. I thought it was great. We were apparently the last thing in the meeting, so everyone was dismissed. Then he asked me, my boss's boss, and our SR director to stay behind. He told us we did some great work on this, but to not continue any work, there was going to be a strategic shift, and this project would not be finished. Kinda stung. Almost a year of my labor, a total waste. Maybe unsurprisingly, about a month later, there were layoffs. I took the buyout. I wasn't feeling super secure in my position anymore. Story 49. I was at a tech entrepreneurial meetup back in 2012. I spoke with one guy who was enthusiastically describing his billion-dollar idea, an app that people at the gym could use to track their workouts and do challenges. He said there was even a social media potential because people could share their progress. You mean like Strava? I asked, thinking he had perhaps identified a niche market not covered by Strava, Endomondo, and others. I got a confused "what?" in response. He'd never heard of it. The look on his face when I showed him the app and he saw that his idea had been thoroughly realized for some time was tragic. How he had gotten as far with his idea as he had without finding any existing apps is a mystery to me. Story 50. I was the one being braked too. In university, I was with a group of classmates and briefly ranted about how annoying it was when people recorded and posted countless, seemingly infinitely long video clips of concerts they attended. Awkward silence. Then 2 of the people there jokingly said they felt a bit personally attacked, chuckled, and said something like, "I want my friends to be able to see many different parts of the concerts, but I don't regret anything. Stand for what I said and weren't close to anyone there." Story 51. I had to tell my best friend that her boyfriend was cheating on her. I didn't want to be the one to say it, but I couldn't just let her keep thinking he was perfect. It was awful seeing her heart break, but she deserved to know. Story 52. Normally, I sport a beard mustache. However, I was doing a show where I had to change it to a Fu Manchu-type mustache. I came into work, and one of my coworkers said to me, "I hate to break it to you, Cam, but you have a centipede on your lip." Story 53. I'd like for things to go back to the way they were before I found you. I found my bio dad a year and a half ago. Always knew he was out there and wanted to run into him before it was too late. I deeply, regret it. Never felt like he was interested in me. Only wanted to talk about himself, his girlfriend, places he had been, the restaurant he went to last week, complaining about his job, He's the kind of guy who could deliver a monologue for an hour and still keep going. I gave it a year, and I just couldn't take it any longer. I think what sealed it for me is realizing that he never asked about my birthday, even though I had known him for over a year, and we made a big deal about meeting and doing something for him. Story 54. A coworker of mine doesn't know the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. My child has type 1, and he's upset that it's a disease we created, and will she grow out of it? 1. Type 2 is one that we created because people eat too much sugar, oversimplifying 2. No, she won't grow out of her pancreas not making insulin. Story 55. I was doing a phone port with At and T, and when we got done, the At and T guy say, "All right, man, have a good weekend." I replied back with, "I hate to break it to you, bud, but it's only 2s. I heard him actually sigh and say, "Duck," under his breath. Story 56. I told a gentleman with acute mesenteric ischemia that it was going to kill him. He told me that he'd had a good life, and if it was going to kill him in the next year or so, then he could accept that. I said, "This will kill you today, within the next 24 hours or so." Story 57. I lived in a shared flat in 2012. Me, F, another woman, and a guy. I came home from work at about 6 p.m. and heard an unmistakable sound coming from the guy's bedroom. No matter how much I convinced myself it could be something else, I knew it was the sound of spanking coming from his room. I'm pretty liberal, but it feels uncomfortable listening to that when you just want to unwind from work and have your dinner. My female flatmate was very conservative and came to me saying she'd regularly heard the spanking. It was freaking her out, and I needed to deal with it. Why should I deal with it? Deal with it I did. I cornered Spanky Man flatmate in the kitchen and I said boldly, "This is rather awkward, but I need to talk to you about the loud spanking in your bedroom." He replied with the immortal line, "Oh, well, it's not what you think it is. I'm not spanking women in there, they're spanking me." "Oh, that's okay then, right? Sorry to have bothered you." Story 58. I had to tell a friend that her smelt I felt so bad for her as she was so embarrassed. But a few of the guys she had been sleeping with had been spreading rumors, so I thought it best to come from me than anyone else I'd okay. Story 59. Daughter of my mom's closest friend. When she floated the idea of owning a dog, I told her that since she has dog allergy, she should not get any dogs. She proceeded to ignore the advice and get 3 dogs just because they're cute. One of them loved to climb into her bed every night. After 3 years of complaining about headache, fatigue, constant runny nose, and skin problems, I finally have a I hate to break it to you moment with her, and she finally believed me and decided to give the dogs to her maid. It was a longer story than that. She first tested it by banishing that dog from her bedroom, then eventually restricting them to just the ground floor, and her symptoms keep improving after each attempt. Her symptoms vanished within 3 months. Story 60. Recently, a friend on Facebook mentioned how she was pro-life, but still thought women had the right to choose. I had to break it to her that if that's her stance, she's pro-choice. She deleted the post. Story 61. A very long time ago, I had 2 buddies who were both pretty well on equal footing with me. 2 of my best friends. One of them started ducking the other one's girlfriend. That was rough. I wrestled with it for a long time, and my decision to tell the victim ultimately led to loosing the other one as a friend. Much as that sucked, I still say it was the right thing to do. Story 62. Telling a girl that was a friend of mine that her new boyfriend, who was also a friend of mine, wasn't attracted to her until she would lose weight. And his goal is to get you to lose weight because he said he knows you'll be knockout then. She didn't believe me. A month later, she said she can't believe it's true and wished she would have believed me. He left her because he told her she wasn't losing weight. Story 63. I had a friend who was a musician, and we worked at a video store. He did it for health insurance, but otherwise, he was successful to be able to earn a living wage through his craft. A guy from a group of friends ignored him one day on the job. For months, he was wondering why. It would come up, he'd whine about it, and then it would be a while before he wondered again months later. The last time he wondered about why, I told him the truth from which I overheard. The friend thought he was a loser for working at the video store. I did it out of frustration because he was still bothered by it. He was absolutely heartbroken about it. None of us saw him for a week after that. We were all looking for him. Roommates found him dead in bed, died of a heart attack, we believe like his father. I wish I never told him. Story 64. I remember one time me and a white friend were talking about a girl that went to our high school. This was back in freshman year. We were talking about how much this friend changed, and out of nowhere, she says, "Yeah, she's been hanging around too many black people." Keep in mind, I'm 100% black. No question about it. I give her a WTF look. She then looks at me with the most shocked look in her face and says, "Oh, shh, I forgot that you're black." I didn't mean it like that I have black friends, I swear. I just walked away. I guess it was my karma for talking about people behind their back. Story 65. Not me, but I was there for it. After a family wedding, my dad and some of his cousins he hadn't seen in years were at my parents' home drinking beers and catching up. As they were laughing about an old story from being kids, my dad asked one of the cousins how his little brother is doing, because they hadn't talked in a few years. The room got so dead silent instantaneously that we could tell something was very off. The cousin he asked about with the brother got choked up, and another cousin awkwardly told my dad that the brother had died the year prior. Turns out my entire family was aware, and had all gone to the memorial and been notified. My grandma somehow failed to realize nobody had informed my parents. So it was literally only my family that had no clue. Nobody even really shared about it on social media, so it was just a complete shock to us. Story 66. 1. Had to tell my uni housemate his girlfriend, my other housemate, had left him and was currently hooking up with another guy. 2. That the Roman numerals my cousin had gotten tattooed were in fact not the date of her child's birth. 3. I had to tell my dog that just because I'm eating something, he doesn't also get to eat some of it, and as it had chocolate in it, it would actually make him sick if he did. That one was difficult. Story 67. About a decade ago, I was having dinner with friends and we were all sharing crazy partying stories. One friend said that a few weeks before that, she witnessed a drunk girl chasing her crush around, frantically trying to kiss him or grope him. The poor guy kept telling her to stop, but she wouldn't have it. Some of the drunk girl's friends even joined in. They tried to undress the guy and would not let him leave. Eventually, The guy managed to escape and ran back to his car. My friend was telling that story as if we were supposed to laugh, but at one point, we gently broke it down to her that she had witnessed attempted abuse, and the fact that the victim was a man was not an excuse. My friend's face changed as the horror of what she had seen dawned on her. Story 68. My grandpa had a massive stroke when I was a kid. I was at my aunt's house when it happened, and we joined the whole family who rushed to my grandparents' house. He became bedridden. My grandma never left his side for over a year. Other people did the grocery shopping, etc., so she wouldn't have to be away from him. My mom and I were there every day. One day, my aunt had to take my grandma to the lawyer to have things in the will finalized. When they returned, I had to take my aunt by the hand and explain to her that he had passed in the hour and a half in which she and my grandma had been gone. Rough spot to be in as an 11-year-old, but my mom had to tell my grandma. I can still hear exactly what she said when she walked in the house, and it has been almost 30 years. Story 69. My mom and I, at best, tolerated each other my entire life. It got to the point that my dad was the messenger of communication between us. I went to see my dad for the holidays. During my visit, an argument broke out between my mom and I. She started screaming about how this was most probably the last Christmas we'd get to be a family because she and my dad were on the verge of divorce. I remember screaming, "I didn't visit for you. I visited in spite of you. I'm here for Dad." I will never forget her face. There's a lot of details like abuse, so my relationship with my mother is not as simple as just not getting along. Story 70. I work in a smaller airport. It's pretty normal for someone to come in and hang around the lobby. However, sometimes they're still around after the last flight leaves. They'll ask when the flight to underscore is expected to, which you reply that we don't have flights there. They start to look worried. Then denial kicks in. That can't be right. My friend said they were flying into this airport today, so you dig a little deeper. Are you certain they didn't actually mean? Yes. This is the boarding pass they sent me a picture of. They show you a picture of a forged pass. They'll explain that they've been chatting with so-and-so for months and often sending money. Most of these people are older men and women who are looking for someone they can connect with, only to get scammed out of their only savings. Story 71. Oof. I had to tell my friend her designer bag was a fake after she spent way too much on it. She had no clue, and I felt so bad breaking it to her, but I didn't want her to keep bragging about it. Definitely an awkward moment. Story 72. Someone had this conversation with me, and I wish to this day they never had. They told me my girlfriends at the time's final moments were spent screaming my name, and that she just wanted me there. I'll never understand why she felt the need to tell me. She was in the car with her during the accident and ended up in a coma for about a year. She told me this about 2 months after she came out of it. Weren't to wear. My phone absolutely hates the word wear for some reason. Story 73. Several due to age. Telling my dad his sister was dying of illness in hospital and she wanted to see him. They hadn't spoken for some time. He waited a day to go on Sunday. She died on Saturday. My cousin rang me to tell me. I had to tell my father she just died. I was the channel for comms due to estrangement. Telling my best friend, our mutual best friend, had a stroke and was not found for between 3-5 days. Nearly dead. Completely gone, but just alive. I wish he had died. He will never recover. No cognitive function. Saying goodbye to my old cat pre-sleepy injection, to be honest. This was the worst. Story 74. Had to be the one to tell my wife that her favorite uncle died about 90 minutes before we walked down the aisle. She took it extremely well in the moment, but then it all sunk in a few hours later. Story 75. One of my friends met this guy online and they were talking, getting closer, etc. The guy's name was ringing a bell and certain details of his situation were sounding off, so I Googled him. He was an offender living in a halfway house for such offenders. Of course, she cut contact immediately. We think he was trying to get to her daughters in a roundabout way. It was just gross. Story 76. It's always telling parents that their kid sucks at the sport they're doing. The parents drop and run and never see what the kids are doing at workouts. And then when the kid gets cut from the top team, they complain with crap like, "But I dropped them off 6 times a week for the whole season. And I hit them with the, I hate to break it to you, but turning up is not the same as actually working out." Story 77. I guess not the worst in the sense that it was a terrible situation, but definitely stands out as the most mind-boggling. I was at the bar with some friends when one of the guys was getting very friendly with one of the shot girls. At this bar, the shot girls would walk around in booty shorts and a tight tank top making bank off of drunk people. You go, girls. My friend was really into it. Finally, this conversation happened. Me. You know she's probably flirting with you for a tip, right? Him. Asterisk silence. Asterisk me. Asterisk goes back to the group conversation. Asterisk him. A full minute of contemplation later. You know, you're probably right. This particular friend still doesn't believe me that this bar and Tinder aren't the right places to find a good Christian girl. Story 78. Explaining to a friend that her appeal against expulsion from college had been denied, and that she would not be eligible for a return of any student loans already dispersed. She missed a lot of classes due to mental health stuff, and unfortunately didn't take advantage soon enough of any of the resources offered on campus. Story 79. Coworker lamenting her relationship with one of her older daughters. She said it started fracturing when new husband-boyfriend came into mom's life. Not thinking, I asked if he hurt the daughter. She was adamantly opposed but turned introspective. Next week tells me she confronted daughter and turns out I was correct. Coworker took a new job away from me 4 months later, after being at that job for 25 plus years. Story 80. I had to tell my dad that my mom had died. Twice. He was in a coma the day she died and came out of it the next day. Once he regained strength, and coherence, he asked where she was, and I had to tell him she had died. Bad enough. But apparently he forgot, wasn't quite back with the program yet, and a couple of weeks go by. He's still in hospital, and he asks, "Where's your mom?" Since obviously she hasn't been visiting him. So I had to tell him that she had died again. The second time telling was much harder, worse than the first. Story 81. One girl told me that she was upset that I never asked her for sex. I asked her if she wanted to have sexual relations with her. We met in a church group. She told me no, she was saving herself for marriage. But because I never pressured her for sex, she assumed I was gay. So I got dumped because I was respectful towards my girlfriend's body. Story 82. My father-in-law was planning a trip to Europe. I was recommending museums. He said he wasn't interested in museums. He wanted to see things outside of displays. Fair enough. I don't want to see an exhibit. I want to go and see the Berlin Wall. I replied, "Oh, geez, I don't know how to tell you this. I know there are remnants you can see. It's just the only example he chose was famously pulled down decades prior." Story 83. Telling one of my friends that she needed to improve her personal hygiene. She had a crappy home life, and her priority at 15 was looking after her little sister and making sure that she was fed and clean and entertained because her mom had other priorities, alcohol. Some of the girls at school had started saying, "Ew, that smells worse than E," whenever there was a bad smell. And E, another friend and I overheard one of them in the toilets. She started crying and asked us if she smelled bad, and we started crying too and had to tell her the truth. Story 84. The need to talk honestly about the fact that feelings have changed, or the relationship is no longer working. These conversations can be painful, but sometimes they are necessary for both people to move on. Story 85. Thanksgiving, and I ran out of time to make stuffing. Phil praised what I served to the heavens and back, finally proclaiming that he would know if anyone ever served him stovetop. I calmly let him know he was eating stovetop. I had added fresh celery and onions and made it with broth and butter, but still. Story 86. Undergrad. The school had a massive shooting. At 2:30 a.m., the first names of victims were released, and I saw a friend's name. My GF had known her since HS. I didn't sleep that night thinking of how to tell her when she woke up. Couldn't get over watching her sleep and knowing I was going to start her day with misery. To this day, probably the hardest conversation I've had. Story 87. Having to tell people that they are literally smelling so bad they are excused from work to go home to shower and put on clean clothes. Then they can come back to work more than once to the same people. Story 88. My fiancé died a few months before our wedding. He had a life insurance policy through work, and I was the sole beneficiary. I offered to use some of the money to pay for his funeral. His sister, who was unemployed, called to inform me they were going to use all of the insurance money to pay off my fiancé's house so she could live there. She didn't even ask. She simply felt entitled to all of the money. I had to inform her I would not be giving her a free place to live. Story 89. A week or two before my sister's wedding, our uncle was hospitalized. When she had visited him, he said something about hoping to get released before the wedding so that he could attend. He didn't, and while she was on her honeymoon, he had passed away in the hospital. When she got back, she called from the airport to have us pick her and her husband up. Since I was the one that answered the phone, I had to tell her that he had passed away. Not a fun situation. Story 90. I lost a fair chunk of my memory after an acquired brain injury. Every time I started talking about someone and my husband had to tell me that they had died. I think that would have to be one of his worst, I hate to break it to you moments, especially because I wouldn't always remember it, and he would have to tell me again, bringing me to tears over and over again. Story 91. The moment the air doctor walked into the room and sat down with my partner and I to explain that he had a mass in the center of his brain and that it was inoperable, that they were taking him straight up to do a biopsy, and we needed to call family. Glioblastoma is the worst news ever. Story 92. My first FWB. I was 17 years old. The conversation went like this. Ulo Saj, we need to talk. Okay, what's up? All the while getting ready for the breakup speech. I think I'm pregnant. Oh, okay. Mentally freaking out. But don't worry. It's not yours. Oh, phew. Wait just a damn minute. Story 93. An employee confided in me that she contracted gonorrhea and was talking about how she got it from the toilet seat at work because she is monogamous with her husband. I was like, girl, he ain't monogamous with you. Story 94. My sister had already been having a god-awful month when I had to wake her up to let her know her car window was smashed and the backpack she forgot in the car, with her laptop and wallet in it, was gone. Story 95. I had to tell a friend that her boyfriend for 6 years, who she will supposedly marry in the future, was cheating on her. It was a tough, I hate to break it to you situation that I didn't want to get involved in, but she deserved to know the truth. Story 96. Recently, I told my brother that he wouldn't get the house. Neither of us were. He's an unemployed alcoholic on disability who uses the house as a flop house. Given a choice, he'd have random people over to stay and not pay rent. We got into a huge argument. When Dad dies, he can't say I didn't warn him. Story 97. Was a small animal vet for a number of years. Vets have to have the organ failure talk with owners. A lot more than you would expect. One of the reasons I switched to another type of veterinary. Stress accumulates. Doesn't matter who you are. Story 98. I had a friend who complained about everyone and everything, assume about me also when I wasn't around. I asked him if he knew what the common denominator in all his scenarios were. We are no longer friends. Story 99. Guy told everyone in the company that would listen that he was demanding a promotion and a fat raise that afternoon during a scheduled meeting with HR and the owner. Yeah, the meeting had been scheduled to terminate his employment. Story 100. Not me, but a friend had a band who got a singer who had a good voice, but was not what the guitarist was looking for, so he let him go. Unfortunately, it was during practice, right after he showed them the tattoo the ex-singer just got of the band name. Story 101. My then girlfriend and I were enjoying some alone time when she told me she cheated on me with my then best friend in the car on the way home from my sister's wedding, which had ended a few hours earlier. Not an ideal time to learn that. Story 102. Well, I recently had to tell my daughter that I have throat illness. Before that, it was when I had to tell people my mother would not be leaving the hospital. And before that, it was when I had to tell my family my son would be going to hospice. Story 103. I work in criminal defense. More than once, I've had to tell someone with a record as long as a Russian novel, a history of defaults, multiple open cases, and serious charges that he's probably not getting personal recognizance or his charges dismissed.